the bride, who never smiled. The bells of St. Augustine's Church tolled like the slow heartbeat of the grey morning. A pale mist clung to the English countryside, softening the edges of the rolling hills and blurring the spires of the distant manor that would soon become her home. The air carried the scent of rain and rosewater, the same roses woven into the bridal wreath trembling slightly in Lady Eveline Harcourt's hands. She stood before the mirror in the vicar's chamber, her reflection ghostly beneath the gossamer veil. The silk gown was exquisite, too exquisite for a heart so reluctant. Ivory lace trailed the floor, catching the light like frost, while pearls adorned her throat in strands that felt more like chains than jewels. Her maid fussed with the hem, whispering, "My lady, you look divine." Eveline's lips curved faintly, but her eyes, cool grey, the colour of storm clouds over the sea, remained hollow. "Divine?" she repeated softly. "Is that what one must look like to walk to their own funeral?" The maid blinked, unsure if it was jest. Before she could answer, the door creaked open and a tall, angular woman entered, the Dowager Lady Harcourt, Eveline's aunt and sole remaining guardian. Her gaze was sharp as the winter wind. "Enough of your melancholy," she said briskly, drawing her shawl close. "Captain Thorne is a good man, a better match than you deserve, given what your father's gambling left us." Eveline turned slowly, the weight of her veil whispering against her shoulders. "I did not marry for what I deserve," she said quietly. "I marry for what you owe." The dowager's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. The truth needed no repetition. Outside, the small church waited, filled with villagers, curious guests, and a groom no one knew well. Captain Alaric Thorne stood at the altar like a statue carved from the same stone that built the church walls. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore his regiment's dress coat beneath a dark overcoat, an unconventional choice that whispered of defiance. His left cheek bore a deep scar, pale against his tanned skin, curving down toward his jaw, a souvenir from the war that had made him both legend and outcast. When the heavy doors creaked open and the first notes of the organ swelled, the murmurs died instantly. Evelyn entered on her uncle's arm, pale, poised, untouchable. The world seemed to slow as she walked. Her gown rippled like moonlight on water, her face hidden beneath the thin veil. Alaric's jaw clenched, not from admiration, but from the strange twist of emotion he could not name. Duty, perhaps, or memory. He had saved her family's name from ruin when her father died, indebted to men far more dangerous than polite society would ever admit. The arrangement had been simple. Eveline would marry him, and the Harcourt debts would vanish. A soldier's honour for a nobleman's disgrace. When she reached him, her hand trembled only once as he took it. His palm was rough, scarred, the hand of a man used to swords, not silks. "Do you, Lady Eveline Harcourt?" the vicar began. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I do. And do you, Captain Alaric Thorne?" He hesitated. Only a breath, a flicker, before his voice came low and steady. "I do." When he lifted her veil, for the first time their eyes met fully. Hers, cold as a winter's dawn. His, shadowed with a soldier's ghosts. She did not smile, neither did he. The kiss that sealed their vows was not a kiss of love. It was the sealing of a bargain, witnessed by God and silence alike. Rain fell lightly as the carriage wheels began their slow journey toward Thorne Manor. The countryside outside blurred into greys and greens. Inside, neither spoke for a long while. Eveline sat opposite him, hands folded in her lap. Her wedding ring, A simple gold band gleamed faintly against her pale skin. Alaric finally broke the silence. "You needn't look so frightened, my lady. I am not a man who bites." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "I fear not your teeth, Captain, but the walls I cannot see." He frowned, turning his gaze to the window. "You'll find my home quiet. I value peace over pleasantries." "Peace," she murmured, looking down at her hands. "That's what one says when they've forgotten how to hope." He said nothing more. The road wound through the fog and the heather until the outline of Thorn Manor emerged, a vast ivy-draped house on a rise above the river, with tall windows like watchful eyes and a great oak door that seemed to sigh when it opened. Mrs. Havers, the housekeeper, greeted them with a stiff curtsy. "Welcome home, Captain, my lady." Home. The word hung between them like a fragile truce. The manor was beautiful in its own bleak way. High ceilings, dark wood, and the scent of wax and lavender. Portraits of soldiers lined the hall. Thorn ancestors grim and proud. Eveline's footsteps echoed as she followed Alaric through the corridor to her chambers. He stopped at the door and turned to her. "If there is anything you require, Mrs. Havers will see to it. The east wing is yours. I take the west." She nodded. "A practical arrangement." His mouth curved slightly, not a smile, but something near it. "We are both practical creatures, are we not?" Eveline hesitated. There was something in his tone, a quiet resignation that matched her own. "It seems we must be." He bowed his head faintly, then turned and left, his footsteps fading into the long silence of the hall. She entered her new room, spacious, cold, filled with the faint scent of cedar and dust. A fire already burned in the grate, but the warmth did not reach her. At the window, the countryside stretched beneath a veil of rain. Somewhere beyond the mist lay the Harcourt estate. Sold, paid off, gone. Her reflection in the glass looked like that of a stranger. A wife. A woman bound not by love, but by debt and duty. And yet, as the thunder rolled in the distance, she felt something stir. Not affection, but curiosity. Who was the man she had married? What pain had carved those scars into his face and his heart alike? Somewhere below, she heard the faint echo of a piano, a melody soft, hesitant and full of melancholy. She turned her head toward the sound, surprised. Captain Thorn was playing. The music drifted through the corridors like a ghost's whisper, and Eveline, standing alone in her bridal chamber, realized something she had not expected to feel at all: pity. For a man who had fought for peace and returned to a home that did not love him. For a man who, like her, had made vows he could not feel. That night, as the rain beat softly against the window, she removed her wedding gown and laid it across the chair. The gold ring glimmered faintly on her finger. She stared at it a long time. Then, slipping it off, she set it upon the table beside the candle. "I wore your ring today, Captain," she whispered to the empty room, "but I will not wear your heart." Outside, the wind carried the sound of the piano's final note, long, fading, unresolved. The captain's shadow morning came grey and cold, draped in the hush that always followed rain. Eveline woke to the soft crackle of the dying hearth and the distant caw of crows outside the window. Her wedding gown hung over the chair, pale and lifeless, and beside it lay the gold ring she had set aside the night before. For a long moment, she simply watched the flame flicker in the grate, tracing the outline of her new life in its restless light. The manor was vast and quiet, too quiet, like a place that had forgotten laughter. When she rose and crossed to the window, the world beyond was veiled in mist. Below, the garden stretched wild and overgrown, the hedges heavy with dew, the statues half swallowed by ivy. It was a beautiful decay, the sort of melancholy loveliness one could drown in if not careful. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Enter," she said. Mrs. Havers appeared, curtsying with her usual formality. "Good morning, my lady. The master is in the library, should you wish to break your fast together." Eveline hesitated. "And if I do not wish it?" The housekeeper's expression did not change. "Then he will not expect you." The reply was polite, but Eveline heard the unspoken undercurrent. "You are mistress now, but he is the heart of this house." "Thank you, Mrs. Havers," Eveline said softly. "Tea will suffice." When the door closed, she exhaled. The thought of breakfasting beside the stranger she had married, the soldier whose eyes had held such restrained sorrow, made something twist uneasily in her chest. Still, as the morning wore on and the silence grew unbearable, she found her feet leading her down the corridor. The library was enormous, 2 stories high, its walls lined with old volumes bound in leather and dust. Sunlight filtered weakly through tall windows, laying pale stripes across the floor. Captain Alaric Thorne sat near the hearth, his back straight, his gaze distant. He was reading, or rather staring at a page that he had not turned for several minutes. His coat hung on the chair beside him, and the morning light caught the silver thread of the scar across his cheek. When Eveline entered, he looked up, startled, as though unaccustomed to company. "My lady," he said, rising to his feet. His voice was low, edged with the discipline of a man who had spent years giving orders. "Captain," she returned, "I was told you breakfast here." He gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "You are welcome to join me, though I warn you, the fare is plain. I have little patience for elaborate dining." A faint smile touched her lips. "How fortunate, for I have little appetite for it." She sat. The silence that followed was brittle, not awkward, but tentative, like 2 travellers meeting at the edge of a ravine. At last he said quietly, "You slept well, I trust." "As well as a bride might, when she wakes a wife," she replied, eyes on her teacup. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement? Regret? It was gone too quickly to tell. "Then I hope the manor does not displease you." "It is." She looked around the vast room, the high ceilings, the quiet grandeur that felt both proud and lonely. "A fine house, though it seems built more for echoes than for laughter." He inclined his head. "It was never meant for laughter, my lady. Only for endurance." That, she thought, was the truest thing he had said yet. Over the next days, life in Thorne Manor settled into a rhythm of silence and observation. Eveline learned that Alaric rose before dawn, walked the grounds alone, and often disappeared into the west wing, the one part of the house she had not yet explored. He took his meals irregularly, spoke little, and seemed to vanish into the walls themselves. The servants, though loyal, spoke of him with a kind of reverence edged with fear. "Kind but distant," one of the maids whispered as she brushed Eveline's hair one evening. "He'll help a stable boy one day and dismiss him the next. Always haunted by something, they say. The war left him half here, half there." "The war leaves no one whole," Eveline murmured. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered the corridor outside her chambers. The manor seemed alive in the dark, the creak of the floors, the sigh of the wind through the chimneys. From behind a half-open door, she heard a sound. Not music this time, but a voice, low, raw, breaking. She moved closer. Through the crack she saw him, Alaric, seated at a desk, head bowed, a letter crushed in his fist. The fire cast his face in amber light, the scar stark against his cheek. "Forgive me," he whispered, though there was no one there to hear. Before she could retreat, the floorboard beneath her creaked. His head snapped up. "Who's there?" she froze. Then, with composure that surprised even herself, she pushed the door open. "It's only me," she said softly. "I could not sleep." He straightened, eyes shadowed. "The east wing suits you ill, then?" "It suits me fine," she replied, "but the silence does not." For a long moment they regarded one another. Two strangers bound by vows, neither had chosen freely. At last he sighed, folding the letter carefully. "You should not walk these halls alone at night, my lady. The house remembers things best left undisturbed." Her brow furrowed. "Memories cannot harm the living." He looked at her, really looked, as though trying to decide whether she believed that. "You would be surprised." Their gazes held, suspended in the hush of the firelight. Then he turned away, slipping the letter into the drawer. "Good night, Lady Evelyn." She hesitated at the door. "Good night, Captain." When she left, she could still feel his eyes upon her, not with desire, but with something far more complicated. Recognition, perhaps, of pain that mirrored his own. Days passed, and the weather turned colder. The manor's great fireplaces burned from dawn till dusk, but the air never quite lost its chill. Evelyn took to exploring the grounds, where the gardens grew tangled and wild, and the fountain had long since ceased to sing. One afternoon, as she wandered near the stables, she saw him again, without his coat this time, sleeves rolled to the elbow, working alongside the stable hands to repair a broken gate. It startled her, this man of title and scars, hands calloused from war, choosing sweat and mud over idleness. When he noticed her, he paused, straightening. "You should not be out without a shawl. The air bites." "I prefer it that way," she replied. "It reminds me I'm alive." He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "And yet you wear the expression of one long dead." Evelyn stiffened. "You judge quickly, Captain." "Only what I recognize," he said quietly, and returned to his work. That night she dreamed of fire and cannon smoke, of a young soldier's face bleeding into the fog. She woke gasping, heart racing, though she had never seen war herself. From the corridor came the faint sound of a door closing, the west wing again. She rose, barefoot, and went to the window. The moon hung low over the fields, casting silver across the wet grass. Down by the trees she saw him, a solitary figure, walking toward the river, his coat dark against the pale mist. For reasons she could not name, she watched until he vanished into the fog. The next morning he was gone from breakfast, and the servants said nothing. Evelyn spent the day wandering the library, drawn at last to the desk where she'd seen him that night. The drawer he'd used was unlocked. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Inside lay a single object, a medal, tarnished and dented, inscribed with a name not at his own. Beneath it, folded with care, a letter written in an unfamiliar hand. She hesitated, then unfolded it. "My dearest Alaric, if you read this, then you know the truth, that it was I, not you, who gave the order that cost them their lives. You were never meant to bear the blame. Forgive me, old friend, for the ruin I've made of your honor. Colonel R.W. Devereux." Her breath caught. She read it twice, heart pounding, a debt, a betrayal, a secret buried beneath uniform and silence. The door creaked. She turned, too late. Alaric stood there, eyes dark as storm clouds. "You should not have touched that." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the paper. "Then you should not have left it where a wife might find it." The air between them crackled. "You know nothing of what it cost," he said lowly. "Then tell me," she whispered. "Tell me why, you carry another man's guilt like your own." His jaw clenched. because some ghosts, Lady Evelyn, are kinder than the living." He took the letter from her hand, his touch brief but burning. Then he turned away, leaving her alone amid the books and silence. That night, Eveline stood once more at her window, the gold ring glinting faintly in her palm. For the first time since her wedding, she felt not hatred, but a strange, fierce ache. Perhaps pity was the beginning of understanding. Perhaps the shadows that haunted Captain Thorne were not his alone, and perhaps she thought as the wind swept over the moors. Some marriages were not born of love, but became it through the mercy of shared pain. Letters from the past. The first frost came early that year. By the time October slipped into November, the moors around Thorne Manor had turned silver, and the morning mist carried the scent of snow. Eveline stood at the library window, her fingers resting on the glass. Outside, the garden lay brittle and still, statues cloaked in white, the fountain frozen mid-song. It had been 3 weeks since she'd found the letter in Alaric's drawer. 3 weeks since his voice had turned colder, his footsteps quieter. Their conversations now were polite, careful things, fragments of civility that danced around the silence neither could name. And yet, beneath that stillness, something fragile had begun to form. A rhythm, a quiet understanding. He would leave small gestures in place of words. A book left by her tea, a shawl draped over a chair she favoured near the fire. And she, though too proud to thank him, found herself watching the west wing door more often than she cared to admit. It was in one of those long, watchful mornings that the post arrived. Mrs. Hovers entered, carrying a small bundle of letters bound with faded blue ribbon. "From London, my lady, the solicitor's seal." Eveline frowned. "I was not expecting correspondence." The housekeeper hesitated before placing the letters on the table. "This one, I believe, was delayed. It bears your father's hand." Her heart stopped. She reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. The parchment was yellowed, the ink faded, written perhaps before her father's death months ago. The wax seal was cracked but intact. For a long moment, she could not bring herself to open it. Her father had died suddenly, his debts scattered across London like ghosts refusing burial. His absence still felt like an unhealed wound. At last, with a shaky breath, she broke the seal. "My dearest Eveline, if this reaches you, then I am likely beyond the reach of forgiveness. I have done something for which no father should ask his daughter's pardon, yet I must. The man to whom you are promised, Captain Alaric Thorne, believes his offer to marry you to be one of mercy. He does not know the full truth. I have deceived him, as I deceived you. It was not he who saved our family's name, but I who ruined his. During the war, I wagered on a contract I did not own. I sold letters, names, and orders meant for the crown. When they discovered the treachery, I placed the blame upon him, a man too loyal to defend himself, too honourable to expose another's sin. He bore the disgrace silently. It is the only reason I still breathe as I write this. Eveline, if you have any kindness left in your heart, do not hate him for the scars I gave him. Love him, if you can, for what he sacrificed in silence. Your father, Lord Reginald Harcourt." The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes. Her father, the man she had mourned, defended, pitied, had been the cause of Alaric's ruin. Her knees gave way, and she sank into the chair, the letter trembling in her grasp. Every moment of their cold marriage, every silence, every shadow, it all came into focus. He had married her not out of love, nor even obligation, but out of mercy. Out of pity for the daughter of the man who had destroyed him. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. How cruel fate could be, binding her to the one man whose life her family had already shattered. When Alaric returned that evening, the sky was low and heavy with snow. He entered the manor dusted in white, his hair damp, his coat carrying the scent of the cold. Eveline was waiting in the drawing-room, her father's letter laid open on the table beside her. The firelight threw amber shadows across her face, but her eyes were clear, resolute. He paused in the doorway. "You've been crying." "Have I?" Her voice was steady. "Perhaps because I've just learned my father was a thief, a liar, and that I am the daughter of the man who ruined you." His breath caught. He took a step forward, then stopped. "You've read it?" "Yes," she said, rising to face him. "Why didn't you tell me, Alaric? Why let me believe this marriage was a debt of honor, when it was, in truth, an act of penance?" He looked away, the scar along his cheek tightening, "because it changes nothing." "Nothing?" she echoed, her voice rising. "You bear my family's shame, you wear its scar, and you call it nothing?" He met her gaze then, eyes burning with a quiet intensity. "Would you rather I had left your family to ruin? That your father's name be dragged through every London paper? That you live as the daughter of a traitor?" Tears filled her eyes again, but she did not look away. "I would rather live in ruin than be married in deceit." He flinched as if struck. Silence stretched between them, thick, heavy, alive with things unsaid. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, raw. "Your father begged me for mercy the night before he died. I gave it, not for him but for you. You were innocent. I could not damn you for his sins." Eveline swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Then why marry me at all? You could have simply walked away." He turned toward the window, the frost glinting behind his reflection, because mercy alone would not erase his name from mine. Society needed a story, a reason for forgiveness. A union between the houses made both tragedies disappear. Her heart twisted. "So we were both sacrifices," she whispered. He looked at her then, truly looked. The candlelight flickered across his face, softening the edges of his scar. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "but some sacrifices are worth the pain they spare." The words should have comforted her. They did not. She turned away, her eyes burning. "I cannot live with ghosts between us, Alaric." "Then tell me how to banish them." She faced him, tears spilling now freely. "You cannot, you are one of them." He said nothing more. The clock struck the hour, and the sound filled the silence that followed. At last he bowed his head slightly. "Forgive me, my lady. I will make arrangements for you to return to London if you wish it." Her breath caught. "You would cast me out?" He shook his head. "Never. But I will not force you to live among the ashes of my past." She wanted to hate him. She wanted to strike him, to scream, to demand why he had not loved her enough to fight for them. But all she could do was whisper, brokenly, "You wear my father's sins as your scars, Alaric, and I wear your silence as mine." Then she turned and left him standing in the firelight, a soldier still at war, though the battle had long ended. That night snow fell in earnest, blanketing the moors in white. Eveline lay awake, listening to the wind claw at the windows. In the corridor she heard footsteps, slow, measured, his. For a moment she thought he might knock, but the steps passed by, fading into the west wing's endless quiet. When morning came, the servant spoke in hushed tones. The master had left before dawn, taking his horse and a single satchel. No one knew when he would return. Eveline stood at the window, the letter still on the table beside her. Outside, the world stretched white and empty, the kind of silence that came not from peace, but from absence. She touched the ring on her finger. For the first time since her wedding, she did not remove it. Because love, she realized, was not born of forgiveness. It was born of the unbearable knowing and choosing to remain. The dance at winter's end. The first snow of December fell like a benediction upon Thorn Manor. It blanketed the roof in white, softened the sharp edges of the frozen gardens, and turned every window pane into a mirror of light. Within those walls, preparations were underway for what the villagers called the Captain's Folly, a winter ball hosted by a man who had not smiled in years, and a lady who had not been seen in London since her wedding. Eveline stood in her dressing room as her maid fastened the sapphire clasp at her throat. The gown was of midnight blue silk, its fabric heavy and luminous, catching fire in the candlelight. A gift, sent weeks earlier by her aunt in London, accompanied by a note urging her to remember that appearances are a weapon, wield them. But Eveline had no wish to wield anything tonight. It had been 6 weeks since Alaric's departure. 6 weeks of cold days and quieter nights, the manor slowly returning to life under her care. She had begun to speak with the servants not as mistress, but as companion. She had reopened the nursery to serve as a music room. She had even taken to the stables, where the grooms had shown her the gentleness of the mare her husband had left behind. It was a life built on absence, yet strangely, she had found strength in it. When the invitations went out for the winter ball, a long-standing Harcourt tradition she had revived on a whim, society had gasped. The scandalous bride of the disgraced captain, hosting the event of the season? It was audacious, it was foolish, and it was hers. She told herself she did not hope he would come. She lied. The ballroom shimmered with candlelight. Chandeliers blazed overhead, and garlands of evergreen and holly draped the marble banisters. The air was rich with perfume and laughter, the swell of violins rising beneath the hum of polite conversation. Eveline moved through the room with measured grace, greeting guests with a poise that belied the tremor in her heart. "Lady Harcourt Thorn," one gentleman murmured as he bowed, "I must say, your return to society is a surprise to us all." Eveline smiled faintly. "Is surprise not the only way to make society listen?" Polite laughter followed, but beneath it she sensed the whispers about her husband's disgrace, her father's debts, the rumours that never quite died. Still, she kept her head high. Her mother had once told her that a lady's dignity was not what she possessed, but what she refused to surrender. As the orchestra began a waltz, she turned toward the grand doors, almost against her. Will, he was there. Captain Alaric Thorn stood at the threshold, tall and severe in his dark formal coat. His hair was dusted with snow, his eyes shadowed with travel and sleeplessness. He had not changed, and yet he had. The room fell to a hush. Even among London's glittering men, there was something in him that commanded attention, not beauty, but gravity. Their eyes met across the ballroom. The world narrowed to the space between them. Eveline felt the breath leave her lungs. He approached slowly, each step echoing like a drumbeat against the polished floor. When he reached her, he bowed with impeccable formality. "My lady," he said, voice low, almost hesitant. "Captain Thorn," she returned, equally composed, "you honour your own home with your presence?" A faint sardonic smile touched his lips. "Forgive me. I did not realize it had ceased to be yours." Her heart stung, though she smiled still. "It never was mine, Captain. Only borrowed, like everything else in my life." They stood in silence as the music swelled around them. Two figures made of restraint and unspoken things. Finally, he said, "I received your invitation. I was surprised. I doubted you would accept, she replied. He looked at her for a long moment. So did I. The first waltz ended. Another began, soft, lilting, with a rhythm that trembled on the edge of memory. A gentleman approached to request the dance, but Alaric's voice cut quietly through the air. She is promised to me. Eveline's gaze flicked to his, startled. Am I? He extended his hand. For one dance at least. Let us honour the illusion of marriage, if nothing else. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. The contact was brief, yet it burned. His palm was warm, his grip steady, the faint calluses of a soldier's life still there. They moved onto the dance floor, and the crowd parted instinctively. As the violins swelled, he drew her closer. Why host a ball? He asked quietly. Because silence is heavier in winter, she said, and because I grew tired of being a ghost. He turned her gracefully, their steps perfectly timed, though their hearts raced unevenly. You seem less a ghost now. Do I? Yes. His gaze lingered on her face. You seem alive. Beautiful. The words slipped from him unguarded, and she felt her composure falter. You should not say such things, she whispered, and yet I find I cannot help it. They moved through the figures of the dance, turn, step, breath, until it felt less like choreography and more like conversation. Every brush of his hand against hers spoke what their words dared not. When the final chord trembled and faded, the silence between them was electric. She stepped back, her voice barely steady. It seems the illusion suits us too well. Perhaps it need not be one, he murmured. But before she could answer, a new voice cut through the air. Smooth, mocking, unmistakably familiar. Lady Evelyn! She turned, and the colour drained from her face. Standing at the edge of the crowd was Lord Benedict Ashcombe, once her father's associate, once her suitor, and the man whose rejection had precipitated her family's fall. Lord Ashcombe, she said, forcing composure, I had not expected to see you so far from London. He smiled thinly. And miss the chance to see you again? Impossible. His gaze flicked to Alaric. Though I see you've found another protector. Alaric's jaw tightened. Careful, my lord. Oh, I mean no insult, Ashcombe said smoothly. Only surprise. After all, the last time we met, Captain, you are hardly fit for polite company. A murmur rippled through the nearby guests. Eveline stepped forward, voice steady but sharp as glass. Lord Ashcombe, your tongue remains as graceless as ever. I suggest you remember where you stand, in my home, under my roof. His smile faltered. Forgive me, Lady Evelyn. I forget how fiercely a woman defends her husband, even one she never loved. The words struck like a slap. Before she could speak, Alaric moved. He did not raise his hand, but his presence alone made the air tense. You mistake silence for weakness, he said evenly. Say another word, and you'll regret it before the next waltz begins. Ashcombe paled slightly but forced a smirk. Ah, the soldier's temper. How quaint. Then, with a mocking bow, he turned and vanished into the throng. The crowd slowly dissolved back into chatter. But the damage was done. Evelyn stood trembling. He spoke the truth, she said softly. I did not marry you for love. Alaric's voice was low, rough, and yet you defend me as though you did. Her breath caught. Because I cannot bear to see you humiliated for sins that were never yours. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his eyes broke open. Eveline, he whispered. It was the first time he had spoken her name aloud since their wedding. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Then she stepped back, voice barely above a whisper. Do not make me feel what I cannot have, Alaric. Not when everything between us began as a lie." He exhaled slowly. "Then perhaps it is time to make it truth." Before she could reply, the orchestra began another dance, and guests swept between them like waves. When the room cleared again, he was gone. Later, when the guests had departed and the manor lay quiet under starlight, Eveline wandered into the empty ballroom. Candles guttered low, their flames trembling like memories. The floor still smelled faintly of wax and roses. She turned slowly in the silence, remembering the feel of his hand on hers, the warmth that had surged through her despite herself. On the dais, the orchestra's music lay scattered, pages of waltzes, nocturnes, and marches. Among them, one stood apart, written in a hand she recognized instantly. Her breath hitched. The ink was fresh. Somewhere in the shadows of the hall, the faint sound of a piano began again, that same haunting melody she had heard on her wedding night. She followed it down the corridor, heart pounding. At the far end, in the dim light of the music room, Alaric sat at the piano, his head bowed, fingers moving with quiet intensity. He looked up when she entered. "I didn't think you'd still be awake." "Nor you," she said softly. He gestured to the empty space beside him. "Sit, if you wish." She hesitated, then crossed the room and sat beside him. The melody lingered in the air, slow and tender. "What is this piece?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Something I wrote once, long before the war. I called it Winter's End. It was meant to be hopeful." She looked at him. "And now?" He met her gaze. "Now it reminds me that even the coldest seasons pass, if one has the courage to wait." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft fall of snow outside. Then, without thinking, Eveline reached for his hand. He did not pull away. The warmth between them was fragile, but it was real. And for the first time since her wedding day, Lady Evelyn Harcourt smiled. Not the smile of a lady or a wife, but the smile of a woman who, against every cruelty of fate, had begun to feel alive again. The storm and the Scar guests had gone. Servants had returned to their routines. And the echo of laughter had faded from the halls of Thorn Manor. Yet something lingered in the air, something unspoken, fragile, alive. Evelyn could not name it, but she felt it with every heartbeat. Alaric kept mostly to his study or the stables, as though uncertain how to exist within walls now charged with emotion. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him from the window, a dark figure striding through the snow, or standing at the edge of the frozen lake that bordered the estate, as still as a statue carved from night. And each evening she found herself waiting for his return without meaning to. The silence between them was not the silence of strangers anymore. It was the silence of two people who had begun to listen. The storm came suddenly. That evening, the sky turned black before the lamps were lit. Winds rose from the moors with a keening howl, battering the manor with sleet and fury. Trees bent beneath the onslaught. Snow lashed the windows like shards of glass. By midnight, every chimney roared, and the servants had retired to their quarters with fearful prayers. Only Evelyn remained awake, standing before the tall window in the library, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders as lightning tore across the heavens. She did not hear the door open until he spoke. "You should not be near the glass. The wind might shatter it." Evelyn turned sharply. Alaric stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the storm's blue-white light. His shirt was unbuttoned at the throat, his hair damp, his expression unreadable. "I could say the same," she replied softly. "You've been out in this weather." "I couldn't sleep." He stepped closer, his boots echoing softly on the parquet floor. The storm reminds me of the front. The sound of the wind. It's too much like cannon fire. Her heart twisted. You still hear it, don't you? He met her gaze, and she saw the truth in his eyes. Every night. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm. Then sit. You needn't face it alone. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a weary exhale, he sank into the armchair near the hearth. Eveline poured a measure of brandy and handed it to him, her fingers brushing his. He looked up at her, and something inside him seemed to ease. You shouldn't have to bear this, she said quietly, taking the chair opposite him. Neither should you, he replied. Yet here we are, two ghosts pretending to live. She studied the flickering light across his face. You're not a ghost, Alaric. He gave a bitter half-smile, a man who cannot sleep, cannot forget, and cannot be touched. What else would you call him? A man who survived, she whispered. He looked at her sharply, as though her words struck something deep. The firelight caught the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. Pale, brutal, beautiful in its own way. Her gaze lingered. He saw it, and for the first time did not turn away. You've never asked about it, he said at last. I thought you wouldn't want me to. He set the glass down, his hands tightening. It was a French blade, a cavalryman. I killed him before he could strike again, but not before he left his mark. Eveline's breath caught. Does it still hurt? Only when I see it in a mirror, he said. Only when I remember how it felt to watch men die and know I was next. Lightning flared. The room seemed to pulse with light. He turned his face toward the window, jaw clenched. You think me strong, Lady Evelyn, but there are nights I wake screaming, convinced I am still there. In the mud, the smoke, the blood. You cannot imagine it. Then tell me, she said softly. He looked at her again, really looked, and something in him broke. You want the truth? I killed men who begged for mercy. I carried the weight of brothers who never returned. I watched them burn alive because my orders led them there. Her eyes filled with tears. You did what war demanded. I did what no man should have to, he said, voice rough. And for what? A title? A scar? A wife who never wanted me? The words struck like a blow, but this time she did not retreat. You're wrong, Eveline whispered. I never wanted to marry anyone, but I never hated you, Alaric. I feared what our lives had become, the bargain, the shame, not you, never you. He stared at her as if hearing her for the first time. Then why, he demanded, why did you say yes that day, when every look you gave me was a lie? She rose slowly, her hands trembling. Because my father begged me to save our name, because I believed I owed him loyalty, even as he gambled away everything, because I thought you pitied me, and I couldn't bear another man's charity. He stood too, his voice low and fierce. Pity? Is that what you think this is? Isn't it? She whispered. He stepped closer until she could feel the heat of him. You don't know what it cost me to ask for your hand. Every word at that altar felt like theft, of your freedom, of your choice. But I asked, because I couldn't watch you be destroyed by the world that ruined me. Eveline's voice broke. Then what are we now? Two people, he said hoarsely, who have spent too long punishing ourselves for surviving. The wind howled outside. The lamps flickered. The air between them was charged, trembling with all that had been unsaid. She looked up at him, the scarred face, the haunted eyes, and saw not the soldier, but the man who had carried her name when no one else would. Slowly, she lifted her hand and touched his cheek. He went still. For a long, fragile heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then he leaned into her touch, eyes closing. "Don't," he whispered. "If you pity me now, I won't forgive you." "I don't pity you," she breathed. "I'm sorry, I never saw you." His hand came up to cover hers, rough against soft. "You see me now," he murmured. Thunder cracked overhead. The fire roared higher. And then, without thought, he kissed her. It was not gentle, it was desperate, a collision of sorrow and hunger and years of silence breaking all at once. Her breath caught, her fingers tightened in his shirt. The world outside could have burned, and neither would have noticed. When at last they broke apart, she was trembling. "Alaric!" she whispered. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, voice raw. "Tell me to stop, and I will." But she did not. Instead, she rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the beat of his heart beneath her palm. "I can't," she said, "not tonight." He drew her into his arms then, and she let him, not as duty, not as penance, but as two souls who had forgotten what warmth felt like. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, another began to calm. Later, she woke to find him sitting at the edge of the hearth, bare-chested, the firelight casting shadows across the lines of his body. Scars like pale rivers, each one a story she had never been told. She rose, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. "You shouldn't be awake." He didn't turn. "I dreamed again, of the siege." She knelt beside him, gently tracing the jagged mark across his shoulder. "Then tell me where it hurts," she whispered. He turned then, eyes full of something deep and unguarded. "Everywhere," he said, "but less when you're here." Her throat tightened. "Then I'll stay." And she did, through the storm, through the darkness, through the long, fragile hours before dawn. When morning came, the manor was silent again, draped in snow and sunlight. Eveline woke with her head against his chest, his hand resting lightly over hers. For the first time since their vows, she felt peace. And for the first time, Alaric Thorne slept without dreaming. Fire in the ruins. The thaw came late that year. For weeks the moors lay silent under a crust of melting snow. And Thorne Manor seemed to breathe easier, as though the storm had taken some of its shadows away. Eveline had grown used to the sound of Alaric's footsteps now, steady, familiar, no longer a warning, but a comfort. They shared breakfasts by the fire, rode together across the grounds, and spent quiet evenings in the music room where Winter's End had become their melody. It was not a perfect piece, but it was theirs, fragile and new, built from everything they'd both lost. And then, one morning, a letter arrived. It came by messenger, sealed with the crest of the Harcourt estate, her family's ancestral home, long abandoned after her father's death. Eveline recognized the wax immediately. Her fingers trembled as she broke it open. "My lady, I regret to inform you that the old Harcourt Manor has suffered a fire. The west wing is destroyed. No lives were lost, but there are irregularities regarding ownership and certain documents discovered among the ruins. I urge your immediate attention. Mr. Claiborne, solicitor to the estate." She read it twice before she could breathe. A fire. At the home she had left behind, the last link to her father, her childhood, her name. When she looked up, Alaric was standing at the doorway. "What's wrong?" Her voice was faint. "The Harcourt estate, it's burning." He crossed the room in 3 strides, taking the letter from her hands. His brow darkened as he read. "Irregularities." "I don't know," she whispered, "but I must go." "I'll come with you." There was no hesitation in his voice. And though part of her wanted to protest, to say it was her family's burden alone, she didn't. She only nodded. "Then we leave at once." The journey south was long and grim. Smoke still smudged the horizon when they reached the Harcourt lands, a familiar landscape made strange by ruin. The manor stood like a broken memory. The west wing was blackened, its roof collapsed inward, its windows gaping and hollow. The once grand gardens were trampled by firefighters' boots and wagons. Eveline dismounted slowly, staring at the wreckage. "This was my home," she murmured. "Every stone of it. My childhood is buried here." Alaric placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll dig it out together." At the sight of them, Mr. Claiborne, a balding, anxious man in a soot-streaked coat, hurried forward. "Lady Eveline, Captain Thorne, thank God you've come. The blaze began last night. We contained it by dawn, but much was lost." "Do you know how it started?" Alaric asked. "Not yet, sir," the solicitor said, "though some of the men say they found signs of oil. Deliberate placement, not accident." Evelyn's eyes widened. "You mean arson?" He lowered his voice. "I fear so." They walked the grounds together, the air thick with ash and the bitter scent of smoke. Inside, the great hall was a shell. Marble blackened, portraits gone, ceilings caved. In what had once been her father's study, Eveline found the charred remains of his desk, and a metal strongbox, half melted but intact. Mr. Claiborne pried it open. Inside were scraps of parchment, burnt beyond recognition, and one folded document, smoke-stained but legible. He handed it to her. "It appears to have survived the fire by miracle." Eveline unfolded it carefully. It was a letter dated 4 years earlier. Her father's hand, unmistakable. "To Lord Benedict Ashcombe, as agreed, I entrust the commission funds to Captain Alaric Thorne for delivery to the Eastern Front. His discretion is absolute, and his silence assured. Upon completion, you will transfer the remaining sum to my account in London. The arrangement must remain hidden. Should Thorne fail, the debt is yours to recover. Harcourt." Her breath turned to ice. She read it again and again, but the words did not change. Her father, Alaric, and Ashcombe, all tied together in something she could not yet name, but felt in her bones was wrong. When she looked up, Alaric's face had gone pale. "Eveline," he said quietly, "I can explain." Her voice was barely audible. "You knew of this?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. "What does it mean?" she demanded. "My father entrusted you with money. For what? For the war?" "Not money," he said hoarsely. "Weapons, supplies, the kind no man should have had the right to sell." She stared at him, horror dawning. "You were part of it." "I tried to stop it," he said. "Your father was desperate, drowning in debt. Ashcombe funded the deal, your father sealed it, and I was meant to deliver it discreetly. But when I discovered the truth, I destroyed the shipment. I thought I'd ended it. And the missing funds," she whispered, "the debt that ruined my family?" "Gone," he said. "I burned everything, so the weapons would never reach the enemy. But I was accused of theft, of treason. That is why I was dismissed from the army." Eveline staggered back. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her. "All this time, I thought you were punished for honor. But it was my father's doing?" He closed his eyes. "It was all of ours." A shadow fell over the doorway. "How touching!" They turned, and there stood Lord Benedict Ashcombe, coat immaculate despite the soot, a faint smile curving his lips. "Lord Ashcombe," Alaric growled, "you've no right here." "Oh, but I do," Ashcombe said smoothly. "I own what remains of this estate. Bought it from the Crown after your charming wife's father forfeited it." Eveline's stomach turned. "You came to gloat?" "Not at all," he said. "I came to ensure that inconvenient truths remained buried. Imagine what society would say, Lady Eveline, if they learned your husband is not only a disgraced soldier, but a traitor." Alaric stepped forward. "Say it again, and you'll regret it." But Ashcombe only smirked. "You can't silence me this time, Captain. I have witnesses and proof, the letter in your wife's hand, for one." Eveline looked at the paper she still clutched. Her father's letter. Evidence that could ruin Alaric forever. Ashcombe's gaze softened, almost pitying. "Give it to me, my dear. Burn it, if you wish. But don't let his shame destroy what little name you have left." Her hand trembled. "And if I refuse?" "Then I'll make sure every paper in London prints your family's scandal by morning." The wind tore through the broken windows, scattering ash and embers. Eveline looked between the two men, one who had ruined her family for greed, and one who had saved her life by sacrifice. Then she made her choice. Slowly, she stepped toward the hearth, holding the letter above the flames. Ashcombe's eyes widened. "Don't!" he hissed. "You'll damn yourself with him." She looked up, her voice steady and clear. Then so be it. The paper caught. Fire licked her fingers, and she dropped it into the blaze. It curled and blackened, turning her father's lies to smoke. When she turned back, Ashcombe was gone. Alaric stared at her, astonishment and gratitude warring in his eyes. "You've just destroyed the only proof that could have cleared your name. And saved yours," she said softly. "Some debts are not meant to be paid in silver or truth." He stepped closer, voice rough. "You could have walked away." "I've done enough walking," she said. "This time I stay." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, in the dim light of the ruined study, he took her hand. "You've burned your past for me," he whispered. She shook her head. "No, Alaric, I burned ours, so we might start again." That night, the Harcourt estate smouldered under the stars, smoke rising like a requiem. Eveline and Alaric stood at the gates, the fire reflecting in their eyes, the last of her father's legacy turning to ashes. He reached for her hand. "Do you regret it?" She watched the flames flicker and die. "No, for the first time I feel free." He turned to her, his voice soft. "You once told me you never smiled on your wedding day." She looked up, her eyes glistening. Perhaps I was waiting for the right reason. When she smiled then, it was small. But real?" And he smiled back. Behind them, the ruins hissed and whispered in the night wind, as if some ghost of the past had finally been laid to rest. The ring and the reckoning news spread fast. Whispers of arson, scandal, lost fortunes, and a captain's tarnished name. The newspapers called it the fall of an old house. In London, it was gossip. In the countryside, it was judgment. But in Thorn Manor, it was silence. Eveline and Alaric returned home to find themselves surrounded by absence. Servants speaking in hushed tones, neighbours declining visits, invitations suddenly vanishing. It was as if the world had decided their union was cursed. And perhaps in a way, it was. That evening, Eveline stood by the great window in her bedchamber, watching the storm clouds gather over the moors. The ashes of her old life had barely cooled, yet her heart burned with confusion. Love and pain had become the same language. Behind her, the door opened quietly. She didn't turn. "Another storm," Alaric said softly. "They come often here," she replied, her tone distant, "as if the heavens enjoy testing us." He moved closer, the sound of his boots low against the carpet. "You've barely spoken since we returned." "There is little left to say." "Eveline." His voice carried the weight of a plea. "You saved me that night. You burned your father's letter. You destroyed everything that could have cleared your name. For me. Why do you now turn away?" She turned then, her face pale and drawn. "Because I don't know what I saved, Alaric. The man you were, or the lie you became." He flinched. "You think I lied to you?" "I think you withheld the truth," she said, "and now I find myself loving a man whose soul I do not fully know." The word loving slipped from her lips like a confession she hadn't meant to make. He froze, eyes darkening. "Say that again." She shook her head, stepping back. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me," he said fiercely, "because I have spent every night since that storm trying not to believe I imagined it, that what happened between us was real." Her voice trembled. "It was real, but love cannot live among ghosts." "Then tell me how to banish them," he said. "Tell me what truth you want." She stared at him for a long moment. "All of it. No omissions, no protection." He nodded once, slowly. "Then you'll have it." He poured a measure of brandy into 2 glasses, his hands steady though his eyes were not. The storm rumbled outside, thunder like the echo of distant cannon fire. "When I returned from France," he began, "I was branded a traitor. They said I'd sold information, that I'd betrayed the crown for silver. They stripped me of my rank, my honor, everything. Only one man defended me." "Who?" Eveline asked quietly. "Your father." Her breath caught. "My father?" He claimed I was acting under his orders, that he alone had authorized the shipment, that I was but a courier. It saved my life, but it ruined his. The debts he owed to Ashcombe swallowed him whole." Eveline's knees went weak. She sank into a chair. "All this time, I thought my father destroyed you, but he saved you." "And I hated him for it," Alaric said bitterly, "because he made me live with a debt I could never repay. I tried to return the favor, to protect his daughter when the vultures closed in. That is why I proposed." Her eyes filled. "Out of duty." "At first," he admitted, "but then I met you." He crossed the room, kneeling before her. "You think I took your hand out of pity. But that day, when you walked into the chapel, pale and proud and shaking, I swore I'd never let the world break you as it had broken me." Her tears fell then, silent and hot. "And yet here we are, 2 people bound by ruin, bound by choice," he said. "You saved me from a noose, Evelyn. I meant to save you from a life without hope." She reached for him then, fingertips brushing his scar. "You can't save me. You can only love me." He closed his eyes. "Then let me do that." But before she could answer, the door burst open. A soaked footman stood there, breathless. "Captain, there's someone below demanding to see you, Lord Ashcombe." Alaric rose, fury flashing across his face. "Not again!" Eveline followed him downstairs, her heart pounding. The entry hall was dimly lit, the lamps flickering with the draught from the storm. Lord Benedict Ashcombe stood at the threshold, his cloak dripping with rain, his expression cold as steel. "You should have stayed away," Alaric said. "I might have," Ashcombe replied smoothly, "had the crown not sent for me." Eveline froze. "The crown?" Ashcombe smiled faintly. "I'm here on official business. It seems the War Office has reopened your case, Captain. New evidence, fragments recovered from the Harcourt fire, a ledger with your name and signature beside shipments marked confidential." Alaric's face went white. "That's impossible! I destroyed those records." "So you thought," Ashcombe said, "but paper, like truth, has a habit of surviving." He produced a folded parchment from his coat. "You'll want to read this." Alaric snatched it. His eyes darted across the page, and she saw the blood drain from his face. "This is forged." "Perhaps," Ashcombe said, "but it's enough to ruin you. The War Office will summon you within the week." Eveline stepped forward, voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" Ashcombe's gaze turned cruel. "Because your father owed me, and I mean to collect, one way or another. When your husband hangs for treason, I'll buy Thorn Manor from the Crown and call the debt paid." Alaric lunged, but Ashcombe stepped back into the rain, laughing. "Do try to last until the inquest, Captain. I hear the gallows are cold this time of year." He disappeared into the night. Alaric slammed the door, his chest heaving. It never ends. Eveline caught his arm. There must be a way to disprove it. If the ledger is forged, they won't care, he said bitterly. A soldier's word against a noble's. Ashcombe knows exactly how this will play. "Then we fight it," she said fiercely. "Together." He turned to her, anguish in his eyes. "You don't understand, Eveline. If I go to trial, they'll drag your father's name through the mud again, your family, your title, everything you burned to protect." She lifted her chin. "Then let them. My father's sins died with him. I refuse to live by their shadow." He stared at her, the fire in her eyes, the defiance in her voice, and something inside him broke. "You'd sacrifice everything for me." "I already have," she whispered. He took her face in his hands. "I don't deserve you." "Then earn me," she said, and he kissed her. It was no desperate act this time, no storm, no fire, no ghosts, just truth. When they broke apart, breathless, she pressed his ring, the one she still wore on a chain, into his palm. "When the reckoning comes," she said softly, "wear this again, not as a burden, as a promise." He closed his fingers around it, trembling. Days passed in uneasy stillness. Letters came, summonses, inquiries, the creeping hand of scandal tightening around them. Alaric prepared his defence, gathering what witnesses and papers remained. Eveline refused to leave his side. The night before he was to depart for London, he found her in the chapel. Candles burned low before the altar. She was kneeling, not in prayer, but in thought. He knelt beside her. "Are you afraid?" "Yes," she whispered, "but not of losing you, of losing what we've become." He reached into his coat and drew out the ring she'd given him. Slowly, irreverently, he took her hand and slid it back onto her finger. Her breath caught. "This time," he said, "you wear it not for your family, or duty, or pity. You wear it because it is yours." Tears filled her eyes. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "I wear the scars. You wear the ring. Between them, perhaps we make something whole." Outside, thunder rolled across the moors, the echo of war, or maybe the sound of something ending at last. When morning came, Alaric left for London. As his carriage disappeared down the long, misty road, Eveline stood at the gates of Thorn Manor, the ring glinting in the cold light of dawn. Behind her, the wind carried the faintest echo of his voice. "Winter ends, Eveline." And for the first time, she believed it might. The morning after the war. By early March, the snows that had blanketed the Yorkshire moors melted into silver streams, and the once barren hills began to show the first shy hints of green. Yet for all the promise of spring, Thorn Manor remained shrouded in uncertainty, its mistress waiting day after day for word from London. Lady Evelyn Thorn had learned patience, though not peace. Each morning she walked the gardens that Alaric had once restored, paths now wild with ivy and frost-bitten rose bushes. Each evening she sat by the fire, her hand unconsciously touching the ring on her finger. It was no longer a symbol of sacrifice, but of hope, fragile and stubborn as new life pushing through thawing soil. It had been 6 weeks since he left. 6 weeks since she had watched him vanish down the long road toward judgment. And though letters came, brief, guarded notes from his solicitor, from their few loyal friends, she knew nothing of his fate. The inquest, they said, was merciless. Ashcombe had influence in every corner of the War Office. The forged ledger, though flawed, was damning enough to stain a reputation forever. Still, Eveline refused to leave Thorn Manor. "If he returns," she'd said to Mrs. Graves, "he will return here. If he does not, then so shall I remain." It was her vigil, her penance, her love. On the 43rd day, a carriage arrived. It was near dusk, the moors painted in the bruised colours of evening. Eveline was in the library, pretending to read, when the sound of wheels crunching gravel broke her trance. Her heart leapt. She was on her feet before she could think. The front door creaked open. The butler's voice echoed faintly, a murmur of disbelief. Then came footsteps. Heavy, familiar. Eveline reached the landing just as Alaric stepped into the hall. He looked thinner, the proud, broad-shouldered captain now worn by exhaustion. Yet his eyes, those clear, steady eyes, still held that unyielding strength she had come to know. A faint scar ran along his jaw, newer than the rest, as if the trial itself had left its mark. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then she descended the staircase, her breath trembling. "You came back," she whispered. He smiled, weary but real. "I promised I would." And with that, the world seemed to right itself again. They met halfway down the stairs, where light from the chandelier spilled in gold across the banister. She reached out first, her fingers brushing the sleeve of his coat, as if afraid he might dissolve into mist. "What happened?" she breathed. "They said the inquest." "Ended," he said softly. "In truth, it nearly ended me." He took her hand, pressing it to his chest. "But I am cleared, Eveline. Ashcombe's forgeries were exposed. A clerk confessed, bribed to alter the records, to make it appear I'd signed the shipments. They found his handwriting beneath the ink." She stared, tears bright in her eyes. "Then you are free." He nodded. "Free, and poorer than I've ever been." A wry smile flickered. "But alive, and that will do." She laughed through her tears, pulling him into an embrace. For a moment, they simply held each other, two souls who had survived different kinds of war. Then she drew back, studying him. "What of Ashcombe?" "Fled," Alaric said quietly. "To the continent, I imagine. The Crown will pursue him, though I care little. Let the law chase what conscience already has." She nodded slowly. "Then it's over." He looked at her, really looked, and said, "No, it's beginning." That night the manor glowed again for the first time in months. The servants lit every hearth, every candle, as if to chase away the ghosts that had long haunted its halls. Eveline prepared supper herself, or tried to, burning half of it and laughing until her sides ached when Alaric took over. They ate by the fire in the great hall, no longer master and lady, but man and wife, equals at last. When the meal was done, Alaric rose and fetched a small wooden box from his coat. He placed it before her. Inside lay a letter. Yellowed, worn, the seal cracked. She frowned. "What is this?" "Something your father left with the solicitor before he died," Alaric said. "It reached me only after the inquest." With trembling hands, Eveline opened it. The handwriting was her father's, firm, deliberate. "My dearest Eveline, if this reaches you, I am gone. Know first that what I did to protect you, and what I lost willingly. Captain Thorn is an honourable man. He carries burdens that were once mine, and though the world may not know it, he has paid dearly for them. You will think me cruel for the way I bound your fate to his. But I saw in him what you will some day see, a heart not untouched by war, but unbroken by it. He will love you as I could not protect you, fiercely, without rest, without measure. Be kind to him, Eveline, and when the world turns cold, as it always will, remember this: there is warmth still in the hearts of the scarred. Your father, Edward Harcourt. When she finished, tears blurred her sight. Alaric knelt beside her, taking her hands. He saw us before we saw ourselves. She nodded, smiling through the ache in her throat. Perhaps we needed his ghosts to find our own peace. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. No ghosts tonight. Later, when the moon rose high over the moors, they stood together by the window, the same one where she had once watched the storms, waiting for him. The night was quiet. The wind no longer howled. Only the slow, steady rhythm of the world returning to calm. Eveline leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. "Do you ever think it strange," she murmured, "how peace feels almost louder than war?" He smiled faintly. "Peace is what the heart forgets how to hear." "And now?" "Now," he said, "I think I could learn again." She turned to face him, eyes soft. "And your scars?" He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "They ache less when you're near." She reached up, tracing the rough line along his jaw, the mark that had once made him flinch. "Then let them stay," she whispered. "Let them remind us of what we've survived." He kissed her, slow, reverent, final, and infinite all at once. And when he drew back, she smiled, the first true unguarded smile since the day she became his bride. The years that followed were kind to Thorn Manor. Spring brought laughter, summer brought guests, and autumn brought peace. Alaric repaired the gardens once more, planting wild roses along the edges of the path where they had first quarrelled. Eveline filled the library with new books, their pages scented with fresh ink and hope. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would find him by the piano, the faint tune of a soldier's lullaby rising in the firelight. He would pause when she entered, smile, and say, "Dance with me." And she always would. Years later, when travellers passed through Yorkshire, they would speak of the Thorns, the captain with the scarred hands and the lady with the serene smile. They said the manor glowed brighter than any in the county, and that laughter could often be heard drifting from its windows, even on stormy nights. They said the captain never went to war again. They said the lady wore his ring, and that she never once took it off. And somewhere, beyond the mist and the moors, the echoes of their love lived on. Proof that even among ruins, something beautiful can still grow.